welcome to the ReThink podcast. Thanks for joining us again. Podcast number 51.
51. There were 3 people I noticed that said they've watched all of them.
So we're doing number 51 for 3 people.
Yeah,
Okay.
I
Billy
had
Galloway and Kelly Baker.
Carl Hutmaker.
Terry
no,
Sapp.
Terry Sapp.
Carl's had it playing in the background.
Zero,
Carl hasn't watched it.
zero
Come on,
chance.
Carl.
Carl has
Carl,
watched all
No,
these.
he's not watching it.
He told me he watched them all. I'm
Terry
just saying.
Sapp, I think, actually does watch them.
I would agree.
Julie does. Julie Galloway watches
Yeah.
them.
So big shout out to our big supporters.
Yeah.
All 4 of you.
This time next year, we hope to double our fan base.
It's possible.
So have your spouses watch with you.
Like and share
As soon as
this.
we
Everybody
launch that
says they
Revelation
like it.
podcast.
They like it when we laugh, but the content, I don't think, is key.
Yeah.
So we should just tell jokes.
That wouldn't go well.
No. We're not.
They're like pastor jokes.
We're really not
pastor
that
jokes
funny.
and dad jokes are the worst, and then you combine the two.
Oh.
Viewership down. Actually, it would increase viewership over the age of 35, I think.
You think?
I think.
Let's not do
the
that.
millennial
Well,
generation. And Gen
I
Z
don't
would-
want to judge all those people, but they're all over 35.
It's true.
There's nobody under 35 watching this.
Never mind. Sorry. I was going to ask a question, but I'll refrain.
Well, we're gonna. This is our last podcast for a while from the posh studios of the ReThink podcast.
Posh studio.
If people
Yeah.
knew where we really were,
That immediately to Farley's, you're right.
it's a toilet.
There is a toilet.
There's
Yes.
a toilet.
But we're not in a bathroom.
we such yeah.
I don't know why it was put next to me, but
Yeah, past experience.
Experiences overseas. We thought
Hey, how about
You
this?
could use
This is
this.
what I just thought we should say. We're kind of like in a closet, but for the next several weeks, we're coming out of the closet.
Oh, boy.
my
Yeah.
gosh.
There you go.
yeah, but don't say that.
Shut
So
down.
don't say.
Shut that down.
No, we're the content of the next several weeks, in contrast to the past several weeks, is going to be pretty solid. I think, backed up by.
You think?
Well, we were in Turkey.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so what do we do? Tell them what to expect that's coming.
Well, we have 9 podcasts coming this summer I guess 8 of them are on location. We recorded one with Shane Wood that we're going to be posting in 2 weeks. The first
So Shane
one-
Wood is, he's a celebrity
well, to Michelle, I think.
in our world. He's on Right Now Media.
Yep.
Yep.
I mean, so are we technically, but
No, none of our
Probably,
content.
probably a more important fact. He's a professor of New Testament theology, specifically on the Book of Revelation
Has his-
at Ozark.
he
has
just
his
finished his
PhD.
Has his PhD
at
on
Edinburgh
Yeah.
on Revelation.
Yeah,
I just watched the
But other
podcast.
than that, he is just like us.
right.
Well, I watched the podcast we
really
recorded
smart.
with him yesterday. It's 57 minutes of us going like this. Oh, that's good.
Oh, he's blowing us away.
Oh, yeah.
That was one of the better discussions I've had in a long time.
Yeah, it's not very visually stimulating, but
No, it's just us smiling, but and we're just
And nodding our heads.
eyes wide open. It's good. It's
is
really
great.
good stuff. And then, at least the stuff we did in Turkey, we did each of the 7 cities. We pretty much on location for all of them, or close as we could get, and that was pretty fun.
yeah.
So I'm excited to roll that out for folks. At least the backdrop is
It'll be-
better,
it'll be-
better than this.
It'll be different for sure. You'll be able to see a different side of it.
Yeah.
So,
But this is the last one here for a while.
Yeah.
yeah.
So we're going to wrap up Galatians today.
Which is kind of interesting because we didn't actually go to the region of Galatia when we were in Turkey.
Yeah.
We didn't. Lystra, Iconium, Derby.
Mm-hmm. It's more centrally located.
Central slice of the pie. We didn't go there. We just didn't have time to do everything.
And Turkey is a lot bigger than you think
my goodness,
it is.
Yeah, we drove like from north to south.
Yeah.
Way
multiple
bigger.
times.
on the east
Felt like-
coast.
yeah.
But it's bigger than Texas, I think, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
whenever I opened up the series in Clay County, I talked about there's basically like 3 sections, and it's hot, medium, and cold. We were in the cold section where it was safe. In the hot section, if you go to the other side, the eastern side of the country, there's like a war going on over there. Middle, that's where Galatia is. And,
So
Hit or miss.
The area I really would like to go to has things like Mount Ararat. You know, Noah, the flood, the boat landed. Well, probably not on that, but in the region.
Yeah.
Abraham's home. I mean, there's some really cool stuff over there.
Yeah.
But
And from my
we're
understanding,
not taking that risk.
it's much more primitive area as well.
Really?
Yeah. Just more, nomadic and mountainous terrain. And so,
Yeah, depending on where we were there, you felt really Eastern European, and then you felt like Mediterranean, just within an hour's
You ever
drive.
been to Eastern Europe?
No.
yes.
Yeah, I have too. It didn't feel like Eastern Europe to me.
Did it not? Okay. Well,
But it's a
The
European
scenery.
vacation spot.
yeah.
I mean, it's a kind of like a lower end travel spot for Europeans. Big
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd go back there on vacation.
Oh
I'd go
yeah, I
back
definitely
there.
would. I want to take my family there.
Yeah. I'd go to
40
Ephesus.
$42
Hang out
a
there.
night in the Charisma Deluxe.
The Charisma Deluxe.
Fantastic.
Where did
Yeah.
you go in Eastern Europe?
Bulgaria.
Well, that's right, for adoption.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like we were there, and we were right on the border of Turkey, because Turkey goes into Bulgaria.
Went to Latvia. That's a whole back story from my past. A drug smuggling run.
I remember that. Had to take some drugs there. Yeah.
It was legal drugs.
Yeah. Missionaries.
Yeah.
Viewership is actually going up.
Yeah.
We talked about speeding last week and
Drug
drug running this
smuggling
week
this
and
Coming
just
out of the
closet.
Not just me, boys.
let's,
Not just me.
What a week.
Let's jump into Galatians 5.
Amen. Yeah, we should get going. So we've done the theology. Paul has said the same thing for 4 chapters. From
Don't get circumcised.
don't get circumcised. Don't be drawn back into the law. And so, I was studying for chapter 5. I came across verse 1. I thought, why didn't we just preach that? It's a summary of the whole book,
Yep.
and we wouldn't have had to say all that other stuff.
Yeah.
But anyway, it says, it is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by the yoke of slavery. So that's his transition piece into what's going to become the practical. I don't say it's all practical. Theology is practical. What we believe is practical, but this is the application.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, theology always moves us to action. So what we believe about anything is what we actually do. So, a lot of times whenever I'm trying to help somebody identify what they really believe, you can look at what they do. So is there an area of our lives that we're not believing to be true about what Christ says? Well, look at the action, because the action is going to match up with our belief.
Right.
It's the root to fruit, fruit to root.
Root to fruit, fruit to root.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you draw those 2 lines back and forth to each other. It's like a tree, like a cherry tree is going to always produce cherries. And if it's not producing cherries,
necessarily. You
If
can
it's not
graft
producing cherries,
in other
it's-
trees.
okay, if you plant a cherry
Here we
tree,
go.
it's going to produce cherries.
Yeah.
But if you plant something that says it's a cherry tree and it produces oranges, well, something's not right.
Right.
Yeah.
So you better be checking what's going on.
My uncle switched the tags in the nursery. That's what happened to you.
Right.
He used to do that for fun. Just go switch tags around so people think they're buying
Oh, man.
and they get something else.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but you're right. The plant produces what the plant is.
Right.
So we produce fruit, life fruit, based upon what we really believe. So the gospel isn't just something that we know.
Right.
It's something that it transforms us. We obey the gospel.
It's an identity piece. And yeah, so whenever Paul talks about like we're transformed by the renewing of our minds, like those 2 things absolutely go together, because as our minds are renewed, our hearts are renewed, and then our lives are renewed. And so it transcends and transforms every area, every aspect of our lives when we really believe in Christ. And that's why Paul is just hammering on these guys, because he's like, don't add stuff to the gospel. The gospel
That's
is
the
enough.
significance of the law being added in. It's going to change their behavior.
Mm-hmm.
So I was thinking about, what happens to us when we become a slave to the law as a Christian. Because we do it. We struggle with it. Even it's not the Old Testament law, but it's a legalism, which is his first warning in this verses 5 through 13 or so. it's an enemy of Christian freedom is legalism. And legalism quickly leads us to pride when we succeed, insecurity when we fail, or it also brings with it, judgment, gossip, just a whole host of sins, because we enter into that do versus done stage of life, and so we got to compare, we've got to judge, we've got to evaluate others and evaluate ourselves, and it's just a danger. I think that Christians, when they enter into that, become these nasty, negative, critical. We look around and we see churches fighting. Yeah, that's it. It's really because we become legalists. Because he says the opposite is to treat one another with love. So if we're not legalistic, but we're learning to treat other people with love like we love ourselves. I mean, he's really Paul's reiterating the statements of Jesus in this chapter 5. Love one another as you love yourself.
Well, and he's also comparing, if you read 5 and 6, together, because both of them are application pieces. He's saying, like, okay, here's the burden of slavery of legalism. Don't get caught up in it. Now, there is a burden that he tells us to carry, and that's one another's burdens. And so it's this, don't be yoked, to the burden of slavery of legalism, where it's about me. This is the contrast. Legalism is about me, right? And my status in relationship to God. He's saying, no, like, pick up the burden of one another and focus on God as we move together towards his calling in our lives. And it keeps us pure, it keeps us on mission, keeps us moving towards and participating in the kingdom rather than my kingdom.
Yeah. I think all throughout the book of Galatians, Paul is making these references to freedom. He's contrasting the law and what it does. But when people hear freedom, I think that's kind of become just a cliche word in the church world, and people want to know, well, what freedom to do what? But I think that's the wrong question to start with, because as Paul is going to go through the book of Galatians, he's really laying out what we're freed from first. You need to worry about what you've been freed from first, and kind of rest in that.
You're freed from sin, but not to sin.
Yes, exactly. You're freed from sin, not to sin. You're freed from spiritual death. You're freed from the worry of physical death. You're free from these law-based duties. And so I think for the believer, you need to first just take a deep breath in that, because that's key. We don't immediately need to start asking the question, what am I free to do? Well, no, let's rest in what we're freed from first, and that's where Paul's going to start. But by the end of chapter 5, he's going to start to roll out, okay, now when he's laying out the fruit of the Spirit, this is what you're free to do. This is what your freedom enables you to do. And so there's a swing from, don't get caught up in what you're free to do first. Let's focus on what we're freed from first.
So the swing, he reiterates that with the Romans, like in Romans 6:1, he tells them, because he's been building this whole case that we're saved by faith through grace alone, right? Christ alone, faith alone. So let's just go ahead and sin, because it's not us,
right?
And what shall we say then? Shall we sin all the more that grace may increase? That's how he says.
Well, and it's actually,
it's a license to sin.
Yeah, and you're still bound then. When you're looking at freedom, what is freedom calling me to do? Well, then you still don't really grasp freedom, because you're wondering, now what do I have to do? Well, that's the same thing that they've been worried about the whole time in Galatia. What do we have to do?
Yep.
And so you've got to get what you're freed from first, and then what now you're free to do.
So there's usually two pendulum swings that I've seen with churches that you look across the board. Either they're legalistic, and so they're just these rules, right?
Yep.
Or there's a thing that's really popular in Latin America and across the globe is called liberation theology. And so that's kind of this hedonism of like, hey, we're set free, and they have a really good they love grace, right? The emphasis on grace without being transformed. And that's not the gospel. No. Liberation theology and legalism, neither one of them are the gospel. The gospel is the middle of going, yeah, you've been set free, so that liberation, but we're not going to participate in things either. We're going to follow Jesus. And that's the key, because of both camps, wherever that pendulum swings, we get caught up in the do's or don'ts, or, I don't have to do anything. And it's like, no, like Jesus, I think this is really important. When he calls his follower, he says, come follow me. He's not trying to institute a new religion. He's calling us into a relationship with him where he leads us in paths of righteousness. He is the one leading the way. So the gospel is all about following Jesus, not doing our own things, not doing the culture things, not doing religious things. It's following Jesus.
And both of those extreme pendulum swings put the focus on me. It's what do I get to do versus what do I have to do? Like those are the two ends of the spectrum. And it's ironic, and I think Paul kind of writes this way, including irony in the book of Galatians, as he's talking about the Jewish believers who are trying to add circumcision. All they know is slavery. I mean, you go back to Exodus, you go back to the book of Numbers, and they're free, and yet they're complaining because God has given them too much manna. They want something different.
Give us some meat.
Give us some meat. And I love his response. Okay, you're gonna have enough quail till it's coming out of your nose, but it's like, given the choice to rely on yourself, people will always choose slavery. If you're relying on yourself and it's about what you do, you're choosing to still be a slave. And this is what it's just filled with irony, because this is the history of the Jewish people. Like you've chosen slavery.
I'd rather go back to slavery.
I'd rather go back to slavery. And it's not what Jesus is calling them to.
So it's an interesting idea that you bring up, because it tells us in verse 13, you're called to be free. Do not use your freedom to indulge the sinful nature, right? But rather serve one another in love. And that word serve in Greek, it's basically he's telling them you're a slave to one another in love. That's really what it should say. You're a slave to one another. So you're not a slave to sin. You're free from that.
Yeah.
You're a slave to serve.
Yep.
A slave to serve one another in love. So he says the entire law is summed up in a single command: love your neighbor as yourself. You drop down to verse 16 then. So he says, so the result is live by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the sinful nature. Right? So this is an important point, I think, for us to catch. This is not about us, because he's going to go into the fruits of the Spirit. They're the fruits of the Spirit.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
They're not the fruits of the Spirit-filled person. They're the fruits of the Spirit in a person. Big difference. Because we that becomes legalism as well.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right? Oh, I'm a peacemaker. No. God's making peace through you.
Yeah.
You have the Spirit.
You have the Spirit, and the Spirit is the one who makes peace.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when you're looking at the fruits of the Spirit, one of the things that, just as I've walked through it, kind of hit me is like, Jesus talks about how the kingdom is here now. You get the opportunity to experience the things of the kingdom in as much as you can now because of this. You want to know what the kingdom is like. You want to know what our eternity with Christ looks like. It looks a lot like that. And so there's just always this comparing and contrasting that Paul does, and it's pointing to, this is what life looks like in the Spirit now, but what it's going to look like in totality in eternity.
He says to walk in the Spirit. And I spent some time talking about that in the sermon. This idea that walking, I mean, it's not real dramatic. It's not, it doesn't say sprint in the Spirit, hop in the Spirit. It's walk in the Spirit. And outside of Andrew, who does a lot of strange walking,
I was going to say, there's nothing easy about your walking.
big heavy backpacks on and all that stuff. Walking's just walking, right? Most of us understand, though, if you walk somewhere long enough. You ever do that on your maps? It's how long it takes in the car, how long it takes on the bike,
Yeah.
how long it takes to walk.
I always try to beat those.
This doesn't surprise me. But if you walk somewhere long enough, you'll get somewhere, right? And so you're walking in the Spirit. And the thing we've got to remember is we're surrendered to Christ. So we're laying us down to take up submission to the Spirit. And when we do that long enough, we get somewhere.
Yeah, it's one of those things too. Is we can all get tired from time to time, even if we're just walking. You know what I'm saying? But when we put one foot in front of the other, spiritually, and there's going to be days that the Spirit is alive and well, and we get to see all the benefits of it. But then there's times like we're walking through the valley and we're coming up the other side, and it seems like forever.
Yeah.
It's in those moments when we can trust Jesus. We're following him, walking in his footsteps, putting one foot in front of the other, being faithful. We turn around after a little bit and we go, wow, that was a crazy experience, but look at the view, And so the Christian life is not about getting it figured out in a moment. And Paul talks about it. New Testament really hammers on it, the idea of sanctification. And it's this daily walking with our Lord and Savior that wants the best for us, right? Yeah. And as we follow him, he changes us and he takes us to places in our lives, sometimes physically, like in this world, but spiritually, places that are so much better.
Right.
As we talk about this, our next step with him.
Mm-hmm. So the transformation happens in us if we're willing to walk, not just when it's an easy journey. I think that's the key, to walk in the Spirit when you're alone, when you're tired, when the path's rocky and difficult. Walk with the Spirit, to walk in the Spirit. So that means these disciplines that we always encourage folks to participate in. Do you open up his word consistently to receive nourishment, even on the days when you don't feel like it, when you don't have time, right? That's the walking that brings true spirit transformation in us. It's not just, I'm going to walk today because it's 70 and sunny, but it's rainy and crappy outside and cold. I'm going to walk. That's the transformative power happening in us.
I think that's what we saw in March of 2020. There's so many people out there that are trying to figure that out still.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to be judgmental and critical. That's dangerous.
That's legalist.
That's legalist. But when we stopped gathering, we stopped gathering together for worship. If you weren't walking in the Spirit outside of that, you're in trouble.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I mean that's why Paul reiterates in chapter 6, like if someone's in sin, restore them gently, bear one another's burdens. Like if you think too much of yourself, like you better check yourself, because we're in this thing together. We're sons and daughters of the King. We're all supposed to be this family living life together.
Yeah, we're in it together, but we're not carrying one another.
Right.
It is your walk.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there is some mischaracterization of what pastors are. Like, we're not the ones that have to force feed you spiritually or are trying to carry you to the end. No, we're walking with you.
Yeah.
But and we're trying to lead in that, but it's your walk.
Mm-hmm.
And so many times I think it's, well, I go to church and the only time I hear the word is from the pastor. And it's like, no, that's not gonna do it.
Undernourished.
Yeah.
So when the walk is tough, you don't have the strength to continue.
Yep.
But if you think about this, like, I was thinking about this when I was mowing grass. My grandpa, he's in his 80s, and you reflect upon his life as a kid. No indoor plumbing, no air conditioning. Heat was by fire. Cabin. Like, life was so much different then. If you look at the last 100 years, everything that we use is to make our life easier.
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes we approach our spiritual walk like that.
Yep.
Where we're expecting to show up to be fed, and that works for a little while until we're not being fed enough.
Yeah.
And then
we need entertained.
Entertained. And it's like, it's not enough just to show up and listen to one of us talk.
Yep.
So statistics are improving as we get further and further away from March of 2020. But Tony Robbins. Is that right?
Don't know.
The,
Oh, the unstuck guy.
the Unstuck guy.
Yeah. that is.
Their recent survey, I'm talking about real recent survey, is still 24% haven't returned to participating in church. That's 1 out of every 4.
Yeah.
You look at that data, and there was like a lot of negative numbers.
Oh,
Yeah.
baptisms
Now-
were down over 50%.
One positive thing, I'm a groups guy. You know, you look at that. What was it, like 68% of churches that
Bingo.
were still meeting, still existing, had
Doing it
group
differently.
life.
So that what that tells us is that the people that were walking in the Spirit more than just Sunday morning were able. They had the strength to sustain, right?
Yeah.
But if that was their only nourishment, which is the people we're talking to right here, are probably not those folks, right? I mean, they're taking the time to join with us. They're endeavoring to.
Well,
to be
statistically, only 4
connected.
people are still watching.
But if you're not doing something outside, both in a group of accountability and on your own,
Yeah.
when
I
the
mean,
journey's tough, you quit walking.
Well, yeah. Here, I mean, as soon as we're not gathering anymore at any of our campuses, what happened to all of us? We started getting pictures of groups gathering together in their homes.
Yep.
And they were living it together, and that's how we get
It
through it.
matters.
It's huge. That's why we're up 24%.
Yeah.
But anyway, hey, from the Posh Studios of the ReThink podcast,
See you in 9 weeks.
we sign out and welcome you to Turkey next week.